Today we're going to talk about sweet potatoes, when to plant them, how to plant them, and how to take care of them as they grow. Sweet potatoes are a warm weather crop. They like it hot and they don't mind it when it's too dry. You can plant sweet potatoes anytime once the temperatures warm up. Here in the South, we can plant sweet potatoes anytime from May, and I've even planted them as late as August. They usually take around 100 and 120 days to mature, so you want to make sure you give yourself plenty of time, give yourself that 3 to 4 month window there. But you've got a lot of flexibility where you can plant them kind of anytime in the summer months from May to July. Sweet potatoes are a great crop to grow in your vegetable garden during the heat of summer because they'll do well, whereas a lot of other crops are not going to enjoy those extreme temperatures. Here in the South, during the heat of summer, the only things we can really grow in the vegetable garden are okra, cover crops, peppers, eggplants, and sweet potatoes. So once you get some of those spring crops out of the ground, sweet potatoes are a great option to follow that spring harvest. A lot of times I'll plant sweet potatoes in the same spot where my Irish potatoes were, and we can do that because they're not the same family. This year I'm planting my sweet potatoes where I had my onions that I harvested several weeks ago. So any of those crops that you're harvesting in early spring, kind of plan ahead and think about, well, can you plant your sweet potatoes here to give that ground some cover and have something growing there during the summer. So as opposed to an Irish potato where we cut up pieces of the potato and plant those and we get sprouts from that potato piece, we plant sweet potatoes from these things right here called slips. And slips are basically a sprout from that big sweet potato that you pluck off. It's got roots on the side of it, and you plant it in the ground and it starts growing leaves and really bushing out from there. Now you can certainly grow your own slips. I've seen many people do it before. If you've got some sweet potatoes left over from last year's crop and they're sprouting, you can pluck those sprouts off those sweet potatoes and plant those slips in the ground, and they'll start to grow plants. We just usually buy our sweet potato slips, and we get them from a company called Steel Plant Company in Gleason, Tennessee, and they have really good sweet potato slips, really good folks over there. And I think their website is sweetpotatoplant.com. They've got several different varieties you can try. They usually ship pretty fast, and the plants are in really good shape when they get to your door. Now in the past several years, we've tried many different sweet potato varieties. We've grown the Beauregard, we've grown the Centennial, and we've grown the Covington. And of those three, the Covington has always performed best for us. The one variety that we've never grown is the Georgia Jet, and upon a good recommendation from the guys at Steel Plant Company, they suggested that we try this Georgia Jet here, that we would really like it and that it does really well in the South. So that's what we're growing this year. We're planting all Georgia Jets in our sweet potato plot. When you're choosing the spot to plant your sweet potatoes, you want to make sure you give them plenty of room. They are a vining crop and they'll sprawl along the soil surface there. And if you plant them too close to another crop, what will happen is they'll start to climb upon that other crop and end up kind of smothering it or suffocating it. So you want to give them plenty of room. And in the past, I have planted them kind of in the middle of a garden between other crops and just give them plenty of space. But this year, with the addition of a new dream garden, I've got many more subplots I can work with. And so this plot behind me here, which is about 20 by 35, I'm planting all sweet potatoes in here. So nothing else is going in here during the summer, just these Georgia Jet sweet potatoes. It's been really hot and dry here the last month or so, so the ground is just really, really hard. So to prepare this area for planting sweet potatoes, I laid off where my rows were going to be. I laid off 6 rows, 3 foot apart in this 20 by 35 plot. And then I put some of my chicken manure compost along where that row was going to be. Because the ground was so hard, I wouldn't have been able to make a furrow with my plow unless I got in there with a tiller and kind of incorporated that compost in the soil. So I tilled just one line or one path there where my row was going to be, just to soften that soil enough so I could get my plow in there and make a furrow. Then I took my double wheel hoe with the plow set in the furrowing position and ran along where those rows were going to be and made 6 nice little planting furrows there. That's going to give me a deep enough trench to plant the sweet potato slips and also plenty of dirt to cover them up as well. When you plant the sweet potato slips, you usually want to put them about a foot apart. Now, you don't have to be super exact with this. I don't get out the tape measure or anything, but just kind of eyeball it and place the slips about a foot apart. Now, this year I did use a little different technique as far as how I planted the slips. I saw a post on a Facebook group, a market gardening Facebook group a while back, where a guy named Bob, I think he was in Kentucky, was showing a different technique for laying the slips in the ground. In the past, we've always put the slips in like this and kind of let this plant leaf or stems kind of hang over the top of the soil. And that's worked fine, but he suggested that you lay the slips horizontally in that trench and just leave a little bit of this leaf material above the soil. And what he said was that you'll get, instead of one little bunch of sweet potatoes, you'll get a whole string of them. And he showed pictures from his harvest and it looked really good. So instead of putting them in the soil like this, straight up and down or vertically, we laid them in the trench like this and covered up almost the entire slip and left just a little bit sticking out of the soil so those leaves could continue to photosynthesize. Now, I don't plant my sweet potatoes on drip tape. I have before, but I don't do it anymore. Now, my dad does it and it works great for him, but sweet potatoes don't need a ton of water. Now, if I put them on drip tape, I just have a tendency to water them too much. So I'm putting these not on drip tape and just gonna overhead water them. Once you plant your sweet potatoes, they're gonna look fairly pitiful for a few days until you get some water to them, really get a lot of water in there, wet that soil, and those roots will start growing and those leaves will start to perk up. Well, they're gonna look kind of sorry for a few days, but that's just part of it. They'll perk up once those roots get established. Now let's talk about actually growing sweet potatoes and best practices there. Sweet potatoes are one of the easiest crops to grow in the vegetable garden because they just don't require a lot of care or maintenance. They need some water, but not a whole lot, and they really don't need a lot of fertilizer. In fact, if you over-fertilize them, a lot of times you'll get these long, stringy looking sweet potatoes and not those really big ones that we like. And as I mentioned earlier, they like the heat and they don't seem to mind if you get a dry spell. Now, if I start seeing the leaves really wilting here, I'll come in here with an overhead sprinkler and give them a little splash. But we don't have to water these near as much as we do some of the other crops in our vegetable garden. Once those vines start growing, you can heel sweet potatoes or throw some dirt upon the middle of that row. Now, I've not found that this makes a significant difference in the total sweet potato harvest that you're going to get around harvest time. But if you have a lot of weeds popping up in between the plants there, it does help with some weed suppression. You can kind of smother those weeds out in the middle of the row there by throwing some dirt on them. So it's always a good option to heel them, but I don't find that it's completely necessary. It's just a good technique for weed suppression if you're having a problem with that. I've also in the past tried kind of trimming the vines back a little bit, maybe running the tiller in between there to keep the vines really concentrated towards the middle of the row. And this will make it easier when you go to harvest your sweet potatoes because you don't have near as many vines to remove before digging those sweet potatoes out of the ground. But I can't tell it makes a huge difference in how many sweet potatoes you get. So you can do that if you want to keep everything kind of neat and in place, but I don't think it's going to make your harvest any bigger. This summer, since I've got this whole 20 by 35 plot and nothing but sweet potatoes, I think I'm just gonna let the vines run. I'm just gonna let them just cover this whole area. It will suppress the weeds really nicely. We'll just get sweet potato vines covering this entire plot here. And then when it gets time to harvest, I'll probably just come in here with the mower and mow those vines down and then dig up those sweet potatoes. So when you're planting your garden and wanting to know what to plant after some of those spring crops are finished, definitely consider sweet potatoes. They're not very demanding as far as nutrients or water go. They're also going to give you some really good ground cover that's going to keep the weeds suppressed. And in about 100 or 120 days, you'll have a nice big crop of sweet potatoes that are going to store well into the winter. I'll put a link below where you can get our double wheel hoe and plow set to make an easy furrow for planting sweet potatoes. I'll also put a link to Steel Plant Company where you can get some really nice sweet potato slips, lots of different varieties available there. Hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you next time.